everyone, and welcome to the Essex Police live museum tour. I'm Emily and I'm from the media team here at Essex Police. Our tour is part of Essex 2020, the county's biggest ever public celebration of science, technology and creativity. On our tour today, we'll be showing you how our crime scenes have evolved since 1903 at the Moat Farm murder. We'll also be showing you how officers used to communicate with each other back in 1840 all the way to this day. In April this year, we reached our 180-year anniversary, so we have a lot of history to tell you about. I'm now going to pass over to Hannah, who's our museum curator. She's going to be telling us all about the history of the museum. It will last for around 30 minutes, so please do send your questions through. Hannah, over to you.
Hello and welcome to the Essex Police Museum. The museum was open to the public in 1992. We have now over 30,000 objects, some of which are in the museum, some of which are in storage. Today we're going to be looking at a comparison between crime scenes and forced communications and see how science and technology has changed that. So let's make a start with our Victorian Cabinet here. So communication and technology were very limited at this time. You can see here they had a rattle and also a whistle for communication, and we'll be coming on to those later. But other than those two things, there really wasn't much in the way of communication. And in actual fact, it wouldn't be uncommon for people to leave messages with police officers' wives or somebody else that they lived with for when the police officer returned. Around this time, there was the Moat Farm murder. So it took place in 1899, but the trial and the investigation didn't take place until 1903. To give you a bit of background on the case, a little warning for our more sensitive or younger viewers. It was a real life murder, so if you want to skip this bit, tune in a couple of minutes. We have here Mr. Dougal, and he lived at Moat Farm with Camille. Camille had a lot of inherited wealth, Mr. Dougal didn't. And it was brought to police attention that there may be a bit of an issue with one of the cheques that Mr. Dougal presented. The signature wasn't quite right. He did have a previous conviction for fraud in cheques, and so they referred it to the police. The police went to Moat Farm to investigate where Camille is, make sure that she approved the transfer of funds, but she was discovered to be missing. Throughout the course of the investigation, it led them to the property garden, where she was found in a drainage ditch. Today we'd have lots of tools at our disposal to identify a body that we find and any potential suspects. At this time they didn't have that. All they had was her shoes. These are the real shoes. They were a 2.5, which was very unusual, and one of the things that could actually identify the body as Camille was her shoe size and the custom-made shoes. There was also a necklace confirmed to be hers by her family and friends. We don't have that here. And also there were some remnants of dress fabric as well, and that was linked to her clothing. So between those three things, they identified the body as Camille, and that was the evidence presented at court. The motive being Mr. Dougal had murdered Camille for her money. It was a financial motive, and he was found guilty of the crime and hanged at Chelmsford Prison, which is just over the road from headquarters here. Now, I do get quite a lot of questions about Jacko down here. One of the very strange things from the past that is now very strange but then was normal was to have your pet stuffed or sent to a taxidermist when they died. So this is actually Jacko, and there is a picture of him with the police officers on the case on the back wall there, and he was Camille's dog. So we always get a lot of questions about that one. So here we have very basic information. We only had their personal possessions. If we didn't have that necklace, the shoes and the dress fabric, it would have been very difficult to identify who it was. So let's go and take a look now at our modern day crime scene, and we can have a look at what we do today. So, am I standing in the right place? Yeah. So, this is our replica crime scene. It's designed to replicate a break-in and a burglary. Just mess about with my glove there because it didn't quite go on properly. There we are. So, we can see that the window is broken. We can assume that the hammer has been used to break the window there. And police officers, when they arrive, notice that there is a photograph sitting on the telly of the lady's dog. Now there's a picture here which is missing, and further inquiries with the homeowner confirm that the picture has been stolen. So now we have our crime. We would take a look at the evidence here and collect up what would be useful for us. So some of the things we would take with us: the hammer may have fingerprints on it, the blood there on the floor. Now obviously we have not used real blood. We would take some of that. As it's dried, we would use some of our sterilised water to wet it down, and then take a sample with our swab, which is like a big cotton bud. And we could send that off for DNA testing. We could also have a look at the lip print on the mug, and also possibly the bite mark there on the sandwich. This, has to be very careful. This plaster cast is a lip print, and this was actually taken from a murder scene of a crime in the 1980s. So you can see here all the indentations in the lips, and this can be used in a very similar way to fingerprints. It's not quite as good, but it can still be used. Equally so can footprints. But going back to our fingerprints, for our younger viewers that may not know what we're talking about, if you look at the end of your finger, you'll notice it's got lots of little ridges, lots of little lines in it. Look a bit like this. And the pattern of those lines is unique to you. So only you have your fingerprints. Nobody else has the same ones. And what police officers do is they will dust it down with powder and then put some tape over it, and this is what they look like. Can you see that in the light? So these were taken from a bottle at a crime scene in Grays in 2012. These ones here would be easier to match to a suspect because there's more of them. Whereas these ones here, you've only got little bits of the fingerprint. It's not a full print, and that would be harder to match because there's not as much of it. So once they've got them, they would send them off to be matched up, and this is what they would do. They would have a look and see what type the fingerprints are. That's sort of like a filing system. And then when they find ones that they think match, they'll have to find 16 different similarities. So you can see here, you've got where the numbers are, they match. So the end of this ridge here, number 1, is the same as this one here, number 1. So you'd compare them and find all the similarities. This is actually a book taken from around the 1940s, 1942 there. Still the basic concepts are exactly the same. And it is very good evidence, but it doesn't mean just because we've got the fingerprints that we definitely have the criminal. For example, Emily's here this evening behind the camera. Her fingerprints are going to be here. If this place got broken into tonight, it's not Emily that's the burglar. So there's a justified reason for you being here. And that's why sometimes we take elimination fingerprints. So we might take fingerprints of known persons that were allowed to be in a space, and then we can take those out. So we're left with just the ones that are suspicious or not identified. The other issue that we sometimes could have is having the fingerprints on the police database already. If we don't have them on the database, we can't match them. But if we, through other means, have a suspect, we can then use fingerprints when we take them into custody. We can match them that way. So there are some things that are not quite up there yet, but hopefully that will come in the future. One of the ways before they lifted the fingerprints, which is what we saw here, they would photograph the fingerprints. This is a very large, heavy camera. This was actually made by Essex Police. This model's from the 70s, but beforehand there was a model before in the 60s. You might think that it's designed to go this way, like cameras normally would, but this one is actually designed to go this way. And the reason for that is this is designed specifically for fingerprints, and it takes the photo at the same ratio, so it doesn't adjust the size. It's a true representation of the print. So you would, I'll turn it sideways, there's a trigger here, so you would take a photograph, the flash here would go off, and you'd have your picture of your fingerprint. And we can still photograph them today as well. So, leave that one there. One of the more recent things, in the last, I think 2018, it was being looked into and studied, although not used, is actually being able to take DNA from a fingerprint. There's sweat in your fingerprint, you could get DNA from that, and it links into a thing called touch DNA, which is where they can get your DNA profile from a very, very small amount, just a few skin cells. So that's one of the more recent developments. I don't have anything to show you for that one because it's so new, but that's where we're heading in terms of CSI at the moment, is touch DNA. So, moving on, we'll have a look at our force communications. That's had quite a lot of change, so let's go and see that one. So this cabinet, this display, pretty much shows the whole history of the force in one display. If you remember right at the very start, we had our rattle. This is obviously a replica, and a whistle. Now, police officers still get issued with whistles, but they tend to be the plastic sort of football referee whistles rather than the metal ones like this. Not used as often because we now have radios, but still issued. So that's a constant all the way from 1888 through to now. Now the rattle, a lot of people know this from football matches and those sort of things, but from 1840 right the way through, I mean, we have evidence of them still being used in 1940, so at least 100 years police officers would have these. And they do make a very loud sound, so a warning here if anyone's using headphones, this is about to get quite loud. You would hold it at arm's length because you don't want to be hitting yourself, and then swing it round. So that would alert anyone to any dangers, criminals, situations, and could also be used to call for help. You'd see what was happening. If somebody needed help, you could go over. So quite a useful bit of equipment. Although right at the start, in 1840, there were only 100 officers for the whole of Essex. So it probably wouldn't be another police officer that would hear it. It would probably be a member of the public that would come over. So that's our rattles. The next thing that I want to show you was not used by the police, but it's a pretty cool photo from our archives. This photo here shows the first mobile radio. So this is the aerials, and this entire thing, including the carriage, is the radio. You can see the size of it from the two people standing on the top and down the bottom here as well, so it's huge. And the reason I point this out is because around about 100 years after this, the same company made our car radios. So these radios would be in police cars. They could be used to talk to dispatch or call for backup or confirm details. So sort of most of the communication that officers would use out on duty, they could do through there. So it's quite a big change in a relatively small amount of time. I mean, the same 100 years, you went from this to this, and in 100 years, we're still using a rattle. So lots of changes at different rates. We also had personal radios. Now originally, you would have two handsets. One would be for talking, and one would be for hearing. So a few problems there. If one of them broke down or wasn't charged correctly or there was some sort of issue, you'd be able to talk but not hear the response, or you'd be able to hear the message and not respond yourself. So we then moved to two-way, which means one handset does both. You can talk and listen on the same one. Obviously they started off huge, it's quite similar to mobile phones. This is quite heavy as well. And then it's moved on to other models. We do also have, this is not a modern radio, but we have the same feature on the existing ones, an emergency button. And that can be pressed, and officers, all the officers nearby will be dispatched to that location to assist. So that's one of the sort of safety features. One of the more recent things is actually sort of blew my mind a little bit when I found out about this one. In 2016, Essex Police launched Mobile First. This is, they've just upgraded the phone models. This is a slightly older model, but the same concept. And essentially what it is an entire office in a phone. So on this, officers would be able to take statements, file paperwork, they can link to the police national computer, they can even live view helicopter footage. So as the helicopter's flying overhead, the officer can view the footage on their phone, and that obviously helps us to be more efficient in where we're moving. There's also sort of an add-on component where police officers can check your fingerprint through it as well. And also a keyboard to turn it into a little mini laptop. So quite a good bit of kit there, and there's lots of examples of it being used to save time. You don't need to go back and forth to the office. You have everything that you need straight away. So a really good bit of kit. Looking at written communication, down the bottom here we have got, I'll take it out so you can see it better, just have to be really careful. We've got a policeman's pocketbook from 1886, these pages are, and police officers would use this to sort of record any notes that they think they need to make. This particular one, you can see halfway through it, he's flipped it round. This is upside down compared to the other pages. He actually kept personal details as well. And one of the sons that he mentions in his notes actually grew up to be an officer in the force as well. So as well as his on-duty notes, it's got lots of things such as, Owen got some new shoes today, or my particular favourite, Owen persuaded his younger brother to truant from school. What a shame. So no other records of him doing that though, so I think he probably learned his lesson there. So we do still use pocketbooks, but a lot of it now can be done on the mobile as well. And then obviously we move to things like the typewriters, and then through to computers as well. The last thing that I want to talk to you about today is the force control room. A lot of people don't realise that this is where pretty much all of the communications for Essex Police are handled. So all of the 101 calls, all of the 999 calls, the new live chat feature on the Essex Police website, that all goes into a central room here at headquarters and is dealt with there. The current one was actually built in 1997. So what they did, and this is another one of my favourite stories, is they rented an aircraft hangar and they made the entire control room out of cardboard, including the computer screens, prints out, and the keyboard printout. And this was because the whole thing was custom built. So before they built the building, they wanted to make sure the layout would work. So they had all of this laid out, where the supervisors would sit, if there were any separate areas, separate sections, just to check it all worked first. So that is our control room in cardboard. And you can see here as well, there's some other pictures of it being built, and then today as well. There is one exception there to the rule. Stansted Airport has got its own control room that does link with us. Obviously policing an airport is quite different from policing a county, so they have their own control room there just to deal with those extra responsibilities, but they are linked together. And last but not least, we have a picture of the older force control room. So there are some of our volunteers who remember the control room as this. It's not that long ago. You can see the style is very different. The equipment and things is a lot older. You can see this piece here is actually this piece here. And there's also a picture there, sort of an in-between. So this one here is the new control room, but with older equipment, and then the one we have today. Have we got any questions?
Yeah, mate, feel free to send your questions in if you have any. So we've got one about how long has Essex been operating for?
So, 180 years this year. So we started in 1840. Originally, we had, it all got a bit confusing because we had separate borough forces as well. Some of those are slightly older. So Colchester, Harwich, Malden, Saffron Walden, that's the last one, and Southend all had their own police forces, so entirely separate to Essex Police, in the same way that other county forces are different from us today. And over time, they all merged with Essex County, depending on town size and what the legal registration criteria were at the time. But in terms of Essex County Constabulary, 1840, which is 180 years. And then we've gradually changed our name.
Cool. And how long have you, we've got one, how long have you worked at the museum for?
So I've worked here for just over 2 years, almost 3 years. So,
and what's your favourite object in the museum?
my favourite object? I would say, if you come around this way, I do quite like the painted truncheons. So we've got one there, and then we've got some others over here. Just because you get so many different designs, and especially they're very bright colours. This is actually our oldest object in the collection, somewhere in the region of 300 years old.
Cool. And we've also had one to say, obviously, the museum obviously is closed at the moment to the public, but what's the sort of alternative for people to do?
Yeah, so we have had some restrictions because of the coronavirus guidance. We're keeping up to date with that. We've got the forced policies, the industry sort of tourism standards, and then also obviously the government guidance as well. So what we've managed to do is give personalised family tours. So have one family or group in at a time, and basically the place is yours for an hour. So there's trails where children can find things, and I can explain what those objects are to them. Or if it's an adult group, we can just have a guided tour around.
Cool. And someone's asked over here what that skull is in this display.
Now that is not a real skull. It's in our collection policy, which basically states what we can and can't have. We cannot take human remains. So this is actually just sort of a prop, similar to what you get in TV. But yeah, this is not real. The dog though, the dog's real.
And do you know who the first police officer was for Essex Police at all?
I think number one is Admiral McHardy on the Records of Service, who is just in that cabinet behind you. So he was the first Chief Constable of Essex. I believe he is record number one. But they would have had lots of officers join at the same time. So it would be more like the first group of officers would have started on the same day. He may have started a couple of days earlier, but they're all around the same time. And that's 1840.
I don't know, back in about 1840 there was probably about 100 officers. Do you know how many there are today?
I do not. No.
It's a big workforce, probably over 5,000 or so,
Yeah.
a lot out there protecting and serving the
I don't
county.
know the actual number. I know that they're recruiting at the moment to increase the numbers as well.
Cool. And how can people book the museum visit?
So if they go onto our website or our social media pages, there should be a pinned post at the top and it will have the Eventbrite link. So the tickets are totally free, but they need to be booked via Eventbrite just to make sure that we have one family at a time.
And we've had a few about sort of what the first vehicle was. I know we have one over in the corner. Should we maybe take a peek at that one?
I mean, the first vehicle ever would have been like a horse and cart, but this is always a favourite with visitors. This is our 1960s Noddy Bike, and the reason it's called that is because police officers were required to acknowledge their superiors. But if you took one hand off the handlebars, it would become very unstable and you'd probably crash. So what they would do instead is nod their head. So the typical, all right, that's what they would do, and that's why it got the nickname the Noddy Bike. We actually do have a second one, a different model, a grey one, in storage as well.
Cool.
And of course you've got things like bikes.
And we've asked, someone's asked what the rocket is for, potentially that over the back there.
The silver one. So this is a model of an airship that crashed near Little Wigborough, near Colchester. There's actually a picture, I don't know if you can get it with the reflection of the glass, of the wreckage here. And it was a German airship in World War I that crashed. And the crew were apprehended by a special constable who then brought them to a police officer to be arrested. So World War I is where we see specials come into play, really, for Essex. There was legislation for a very long time beforehand, but we didn't really use it. So yeah, World War I, to replace all of the officers that then joined the army, we started specials.
Cool. Do you know what the first sort of helmet looked like back in the day? Have we got any of those in here?
Yes. The very first one was actually our stovepipe hat. So this actually has, you can't see it, but it has a wooden frame inside for protection, and it also meant that you could stand on it. So if you wanted to stand out in a crowd or see over a wall or a fence, you could put this down on the floor and stand on the top of it.
That's really cool. And someone's asked, I think his name's Huxley, who's 7, he's asked, how did the police used to direct the traffic? Have we got anything in here that shows that? Cool.
Sort of back and forth a bit. So there is a photograph of a police officer. It's quite a little photograph, and he's standing on a podium there, and he's wearing these white sleeves, and he would be directing the traffic from the podium, and the white sleeves is so you could actually see better when you're driving. So before traffic lights, that's what we had. And you still might see a similar thing if there's police officers today and they're trying to direct around an accident, or something's happened, the road is closed or it's flooded. They might still point things out to you.
Cool. And do you know how many calls Essex Police get a day?
Well, it depends on things like time of year. So on average, about 1,500. But times like Halloween, school holidays, quite a few, sometimes over Christmas, there can be spikes in calls.
Cool. And have you got any sort of information on the epaulets that the police wear on their shoulders? Have we got anything about that in here?
Yeah, we've got a set on the wall over here. It's done through. So, this is sort of a full set of epaulets. You start off with the police constable, and then you can move up to sergeant. You can see they've got the stripes. These numbers would be their own personal collar number. It wouldn't be 4 zeros. Actually, we're up to 5 digits now, so that would be their number. And then sort of as you go along, it's a higher rank. ending with the Chief Constable right at the top. So when we have younger children in and they ask about these, I always say pretty much the more colours you've got and the fancier it looks, the higher up they are.
Cool.
And their hat too.
And maybe we'll just take one more question then. So, do we have anything about the first female police officer at all? Is there any sort of displays in here? Lovely. Let's take a look.
So, not a police officer in the way that you think today, but Mrs. Wilson here, I don't think there's any relation to me, was one of the first female patrols, and this is her notebook from 1918, so that's 102 years old. And what we've seen is her role was kind of more like a modern day social worker than a police officer. So things like advising young ladies on their behaviour, or sort of women and children inquiries. One of the things that we actually look at with some school children is the changes in uniform, because you can see in this photo all the ladies were in skirts, and you're not really going to be able to sort of be jumping fences and all that sort of thing comfortably in a skirt. And that kind of signifies the different roles. So there was a time when women and male police officers had slightly different roles.
Cool.
Nowadays, obviously, we all have the same uniform.
And we just got one more,
Okay.
just one special one. So Amelia, age 9, says, what happens when 2 fingerprints are the same?
So 2 found fingerprints, that would mean if you found 2 that are the same at a crime scene, it would be from the same person. If you found one at a crime scene and then later on you find it somewhere else, it means it was the same person. So sometimes if somebody's been done quite a few different crimes in different places and their fingerprint is in each location, we can say they've definitely been there. So sometimes that helps us to link different cases together.
Cool. I think that's it then. So thank you very much, Hannah, for showing us around today. Obviously, we've gone through about whether you can book a tour online or not. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, I think that's everything.
Cool. And if we've sort of inspired you today to start a career with us, then please do check out our career page, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.